dat het weer zo'n volle bak is bij dit derde hoogbouwdebat. Mijn naam is Yvonne Franquinet. And I'm going to switch to English now. As we announced, the evening is going to be in English, and that's because we have one of the guests specially flown in from England. Kay, very welcome especially to you. She's going to be interviewed during the evening, but because we really appreciate her being part of the debate, and because possibly she can also take something home from the debate, we're going to do the whole evening in English and not just her part. If you feel uncomfortable, if you have a comment or a question and you really feel, like you want to do it in Dutch, just do so. We'll adjust or we translate. We'll sort it out. Some of you are here for the first time, but I also see a lot of faces coming back, so that's really good. Apparently, we sort of struck on a theme which is really important for a lot of you. The first debate we organized also in this hall, it was because the plans for the Sluisbuurt were announced. They were made public, and I have a confession to make, because years before that, when I just was appointed director of the Architecture Center, I heard about the plans for the strip opposite the central station, and I heard about the 5 towers that are going to be there. And then I thought, oh, it would be really nice to make an expo or an exhibition about that, because it's in the center of the city and it's quite important, and it was striking to me. But somehow, with all things happening, it didn't work out, and I sort of forgot about that idea. And now when the Sluisbuurt came on the agenda, we came up with the idea to start this debate. And the question that's been circling my mind is why now? Why are we all here? Why did I forget about it earlier, and why is it now? Is it so important now? Is it because it's after the recession? Is it because that was a plan for a part of the city and not just a plan for one tall building? Is it because it was a residential plan and not, like Björn Masterhoek said today, I heard him say, it's a residential, it's not a chimney? Is it because of the height? Are we really here to talk about the difference of 20 meters? And I think not. And that's why we're here for the third time. Because we said in the announcement deliberately that we're going to move away from the Sluisbuurt and we're going to look to other parts of the city. And one of that is in the north. Do I have to do this myself? Yes. Okay, that's me. And here is one of the pictures. We're talking about something that is not just in plans, but that's already happening. And when you look at Amstelkwartier, or when you look at the Amsterdam Noord, it's already there. So what we're going to do tonight is taking these plans and some of the plans that are already realized or under construction again as a catalyzer for the debate. It's going to be not about the streets. It's not going to be about specific plans. It's not going to be about design for certain buildings. It's going to be about the density that's coming at full speed at us for the city. And high-rise is just a part of that solution, an answer to a question on how to deal with the city. So maybe tonight is not so much going to be about the north, and it's not so much going to be about high-rise, but maybe it's about raising the low-rise. This is the program that we have for you tonight. I'm going to hand over the mic to Peter Defesche, who is an architect, but also our one and only architect in residence. We have 3 interviews planned. Peter is going to introduce them to you, and we'll make sure that there is plenty of time for a debate with you, because that's also why you're here. So Peter, please. The evening is yours.
I have a technical question. Are we connected? We are? Okay, yes, there we are. Thank you very much. To be connected. I'm going to read this small statement. It saves us a lot of time, but it also makes my text more precise than when I do it out of improvisation. And it's called New Growing Pains of a Successful Urban Economy and an Effective City Marketing. So here we are. It's the problem that success brings along. We have an overall map of the city, Michel. Oh, I have that, right. I have the map. Right. In this third Archon public debate of the season, we will continue to pursue some of the subjects we discussed earlier, such as the rapid and large-scale transformation in this city, the pressure that's being felt to provide new, agreeable and affordable homes, a pressure not only felt by Amsterdam politicians, but impatiently undergone by its citizens as well, the suitability of the chosen locations and the question of appropriate architecture, all that. The presentation of the spectacular Sluisbuurt project in January, February, led to questions on whether a plan of this kind was a suitable idea in this context, that particular context, whether it would enrich the skyline of the city or damage it. It raised the question whether a plan of this nature would become a perceivable next step in the further urban development of Amsterdam, or that it would always stand out as a quarter that impossibly merged with the typical and well-protected local traditions of urban design. Long sentences, but nevertheless, did it fit or did it not? Could it fit then as a natural part of the future history of Amsterdam? And finally, that debate addressed the issue of the typology of the proposed high-rise residential buildings themselves. Is it a smart enough building, this building form? Can the combination of residential towers and perimeter blocks as proposed, can that be elaborated in a way that they provide homes and working spaces and social spaces for all income groups, for all generations, family types, and does it actually help to build the undivided city? This is a political item, and the question is, of course, is it also an architectural and an urban design item? Will a plan like that, like the Sluisbuurt plan, provide enough diversity? And if so, how difficult is it to achieve that diversity? So it seemed that with the first two debates we almost covered it all, but in the weeks following those debates, it sometimes looked as if the only thing that mattered in the public opinion was the actual height of the proposed towers, and that the only thing mattered in the professional debate that followed was the choice between a so-called modernist urban design proposition and a so-called revival of a traditional urban layout. Maybe nice, but not precise. Archon felt that at the end of these two debates, we hadn't harvested all that was there, and some of the nuances had disappeared too quickly, unintentionally narrowed down to these two issues I just mentioned. Interesting but not complete, exciting but not necessarily the heart of the matter. Too soon, black and white, and too soon a yes or no issue. When we put the municipal Sluisbuurt plan on the Archon agenda, it was still a concept and open to public and political discussion. And this September, the City Council is very close to the actual decision making. And it will give its final verdict within a few weeks from today, if I'm well informed. Meanwhile, during this process, Archon wanted to broaden the scope, broaden it in terms of locations. The Sluisbuurt plan, after all, is one of a collection, maybe one of the most spectacular ones today, but it's still only the beginning of an era of planning large-scale transformations, of further growth of the population, of densification of reclaimed urban areas, and of an up-tempo enlargement of the city's public housing collection, all that at the same time. If we go north or west, we'll see more than enough new urban projects. They're all in this map somehow. If you look at the pink parts of the city, that's the parts where work is being done or work is being underway. And it is a lot. It's not just a lot by square meters, and it's not just a lot by population, but it's a lot of work in general for the coming periods of time. So if you see the map, we'll see that there's more than enough new urban projects emerged to understand that already this one theme of density, it's not high-rise buildings tonight, but it's density, keeps us busy for the next decade at least. Just in case we won't solve all the problems tonight, we have a decade, which is fine. Tonight, we'll also broaden the scope in terms of scale, and we have invited a landscape architect, an urban designer, and an architect to ensure ourselves of the insight of every scale that density works on. and of course hoping that we can make the connection between these disciplines as we go along. Please welcome therefore Jan-Dirk Hoekstra, Khaa London, and Jarrik Ouburg. Jan-Dirk Hoekstra, they'll be on the seats one by one, and you'll get enough chance to talk to them, to hear them talk. Jan-Dirk Hoekstra is a landscape architect, former director of H+N+S Landscape Architects, and advisor to the board at present. His field of expertise extends into the cultural sector at large, and recent work has led him to focus on themes connected to water management, energy transition, and the effect on present urban environments. Khaa London, from London, that's why we speak English tonight, is principal designer and founder of KHAA, a London-based office that doesn't only concern itself with the design of a single architectural object, but also with questions on an urban scale. And the office delivers strategic advice to a wide range of clients in the field of spatial planning on all sides of the scale. Khaa London combines her background as an architect with working in large-scale projects like the possibly best-known London Olympics. Jarrik Ouburg is one of the founders of the brand new architectural office here in Amsterdam, HOH, Hartem Inc. Ouburg Hilgendorf. And he has only recently left his position as head of the Department of Architecture at the Academy to a successor. And now his office is set to work on a variety of architectural and research projects, some of them closely linked to the questions of transformation and density, our agenda for tonight. We're also a little bit going to experiment with the form of the debate itself. Rather than trying to squeeze in a series of lectures in a tight schedule that will prove to be too short and thus leaving little time for actual debate and interaction with you, the audience, we asked tonight 3 participants to be interviewed instead so that the conversation is already underway and the second part of the evening is truly yours. Less images, of course, than last times, but more time. I do hope so. Now, I brought one image. Yes. This is a fantasy image, of course. If I turn around, you still hear me, right? This is a fantasy image, of course, and it's about these 3 scales. So a fantasy apartment building somewhere in these densely built-up urban areas we're going to face in Amsterdam. Now, my question would be, if I would live up here in this small apartment, I would be concerned with the nature of that apartment itself in this future urban area. Not just with the view, but also with how much of privacy is there. How much is in that apartment really? How big or how small should it be in this new condition? And if I would live up here, I would be interested in the building as a complete apartment building. I would want to know how much is there outside of my apartment. What is inside the building? What is it that we share inside this building? And what is the building made of in terms of spatial arrangement and image? And if I would live here, I'd be very, very interested in the position of the block in the urban plan. I would be very interested in what's going on the street, and I'd be very interested in the urban context around me. So if we add this all up, we have our questionnaire for tonight, and if we add it all up, my question would be, is the question that we are going to ask about all these residential levels, is that going to be very different from what we know today? These are already my questions to my guests. So this is where this is where my starting point is. And so the conversation is not about density and as an objective in itself. It's not about how can we squeeze as many apartments in this lot as we can. Density is a means to an end, and it's a part of a possible solution to the problem of lacking public housing, and lacking housing in general. But even then, it's not merely about numbers and quantities, and it's not merely about the maximum speed of production. It's all part of this problem, but it's as much as that a cultural issue, and it's as much a cultural thing than it's mathematics and economy. Because density can also redefine, that's what the picture is about, the private domain, the collective domain, and the public realm as we understand it now. It's about the present and the nearness of other citizens, and it's about the way we want to share things in the future, about the sense of crowdedness and the anonymity, and it's about metropolitan excitement. So let's first address these issues, and then we'll know more. And then we can envision how to live this renewed urban context. We can design architecture for it, that it's appropriate. And later we'll speak at length about the proper height of apartments, buildings. And even later, we can discuss the possible necessity for some architectural icons. My guess is fewer than you might think. New density just might influence our urban culture as we know it. And of course, the nature of its architecture alongside. So let's start to speculate on the answers. And my first guest, Jan de Hoekstra, please step into the light. I'll give you the pointer and I'll give you the power.
Thank you very much. I think I've got to sit here. Is it?
I'll sit next to you.
Everybody's placed here tonight.
I'll sit next to you. You want some water?
I have. Thank you very much.
You do? Okay. The real talk shows offer wine, but this is what we have. Okay. I have a few questions prepared for you, and if we improvise, then they'll be more exciting than that. But the first question, is, I'll admit this, is the question you told me on the phone. This is really what you have to ask me, and then I'll give you a great answer.
Yes.
That question is not about building to start with. That question is about, do we know well enough who we are building for? So you say, if we're going to talk about density, we're going to talk about the demographic question, the demographic program that's lying underneath it, right?
Yeah.
And you have prepared a few images, yes. Otherwise it's only text, ladies and gentlemen, to illustrate your answer.
Yeah.
Did we get you started?
In fact, I can only speak with slides. This is my, that's my thing. But yes, this answer is a studied answer. Two things before. I'm a landscape architect. So tonight I speak from the point of view of a landscape architect, and also I'm an advisor to the board of deputies from the province on spatial quality. That is my thing, but on the provincial level. So I just also like to speak on the regional scale, and I think my slides are from the metropolitan area, so the MRA, Amsterdam Metropolitan Area. So, interviews. There we go. The first thing is that you know, the discussion on the level of the Amsterdam metropolitan area goes a bit like this. There are 230,000 houses needed up to 2040. And then the discussion immediately, the developers say, a bit exaggerated of course, okay, we're going to start now, everybody wants houses with gardens, so where are the locations? There we go. So we fall back into this, what we call in Holland the Vinex tradition, building large new urban quarters against, let's say, in the direct neighborhood of cities, etc., etc. And my thing is that before we are talking about high-rise or low-rise or whatever, we should think about what qualities and what is the housing, the quality of the housing demand. And here you see, I have to translate it a bit. Let's say this is about, here is one family housing versus apartments, social housing versus market housing, self-building, project developments, and there are lots of more of this axis, which I think we have to let's say, to fractal these large numbers into this kind of categories. And of course, there are also even different living environments. It's not only the dwelling, but also of the house, but also what is direct in the direct surrounding. Now, I just only touch some things because, of course, otherwise it's going to be much too long. Here you see, this is Amsterdam. This is the province. So you see the north of the province, let's say, is hardly any growth, and in the Amsterdam metropolitan area is about this. There is some growth, and of course this growth, you see some components of the growth. It is inland immigration from outside, from other countries. Then is natural growth, and there is immigration saldo from people, and this is here below zero. This is new from 2015. People are also there is an immigration surplus out Amsterdam. But having said, let's say that here begins the house demand is also, of course, it's partly in this growing numbers. And let's just, to make a sort of a start of the idea, is that people from abroad coming here, immigrants coming here, they want small houses, affordable. Starters on the housing market, they also want just small houses and cheap. Then, of course, are the people that want to make a living career. They want bigger houses. They're coming from a small house going to a bigger house. But the thing is that there is lots of, even in Amsterdam, there are lots of old people on the level of the metropolitan area. Again, there are lots of people, old people, living in too big houses. So there is also to be built very intelligent in, let's say, attractive apartments on nice places, so that we can pull out all the oldies out these bigger houses, so that the living career is possible again. Well, that is only one thing, and then again it becomes even more complicated. This is the possible locations. As we saw just the Amsterdam part of it, but this is the possible building locations in the MRA. And again, then is the question about where do we build what? Because this also gives movement through the city. This whole, you know, people are going to move from one place to another. And then is another, and I think is also a very qualitative question. Now also this regeneration of whole areas. Only areas for only rich people are then maybe the result of this. And also this needs intelligent story and maybe policy also. Dus how do we get a human mixed, because that's where we're proud of in Holland and in Amsterdam, that we have these mixed urban quarters with different income groups living together. And that has to do with how do we think about moving people and let's say the dynamics of that kind of a dynamics. I think this was the answer to my first question.
So we start off justly so with the portrait of who the people are we're building for, right? Yeah. And what they do, how they move, who they are, and what they need. We'll get back to that.
To be able to answer the question high rise or not, or what kind of living areas do we want?
And we'll get back to that. And there's just to switch to a different perspective, and there's a couple of things I really want to ask you, so they're not necessarily well-connected questions. But number two is the question on this ambition of density, that we feel it's an obligation, we need to do something, we need to solve a problem. But on the other hand, it's a chance. It's a chance to work on something that's very much on your agenda, hence the question, which is sustainability.
Yes.
And the simple question is, if densification and of an urbanizing, in a literal sense, of parts of Amsterdam, is that something that is helpful when it comes to raising the sustainable level of this city? Are we on our way to Paris, to ask it?
Yes, or how are we on our way to Paris?
Right.
This is, also this question, I've prepared some slides, I'm very sorry. But
it's very spontaneous evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Excuse me. No, but you need slides, I need images to answer this question, I'm very sorry. Look, this is, you see the energy demand of the province of North Holland on the left side, and the energy demand of the Amsterdam metropolitan area. So you see how big this, compared to the provincial energy demand, this is. This is what this, well, you can say lots of things here about this, but the thing is, how are we going to solve this problem? Even when we put all the whole, for people that know, there's a very big lake on the east side of Amsterdam, the Markermeer-IJmeer, sorry. If we put that completely full with wind turbines, we only solve, for instance, 1/3 of the electricity demand of the MRA. So this is a huge demand, and I think it's a very serious demand. And we can't say, well, let's building everything on the North Sea, because that is never enough. So the thing is that we investigated how this. We tried to build up sort of a story. How can Amsterdam metropolitan area deal with this problem? And then we came up, the only thing of what we have to do in any case is to connect this renewable energy demand to all other spatial developments, etc. And then there was, I'm not going to, there are even 23 kind of urban living areas that behave different from each other in terms of energy. And there's a sort of, you can see that for density, function, mobility, de besparing, wat is besparing ook weer?
To save.
Save, energy savings, etc. All this is for these 23 living, for these types of living environments is different. And here's, for instance, one. It's just an image that for the just post-war urban area, there are some, of course, all kinds of things you can do there in terms of renewable energy, and so you can in all the other ones. So we have not only, it's not only about high-rise building or low-rise building, but it's also in how to connect and how to save and how to produce energy in this area, how to organize mobility, parked cars, etc., etc. Also, and now we're talking also about the, let's say, the structure of the urban design. You should use very intelligently all these power stations that you already have, because this electrical infrastructure is very expensive. If you have to do everything over, this is costing really billions of euros. So your urban design, in terms also of density and high-rise, you should be intelligently think this over and to connect. That is this one, and there's another one. For instance, this is called a grand design. Maybe a strange image for a grand design, but this is the grand design of the warmth network, the heat network. And you see there is for Tata, this is up here, this is our steel industry here. It produces lots of heat. Here, of course, there are some power stations here and here producing lots of heat, and there is a heat network made to connect and to use the heat from these installations. And this one, you said this is not durable, but you can connect also this heat system maybe later on to these geothermal power stations deep under the ground, etc. Also, this is, in a way, structuring your, let's say, densities or your real urban, and your mobility, etc., etc.
Could you give a short example of how that works?
Now, I live, for instance, I live here in Oostelijke Eilanden,
yeah.
This area, and there have to, you have to, this grid is already there. And this is dense enough to, whatever, here, we have to rush.
Okay.
Then you should ask this complex question.
My fault.
No, but let's say that this is only...
I have a simple one for you. It's coming out.
It's coming out. This is also, but in terms of the discussion for tonight, this is very interesting. This is, I think that this is a research from Canada. And they, and of course, only not, this is not the truth maybe, but let's say we have to discover lots of things still on this subject. They say, let's say from the renewable energy point of view, not the high rise, the most high rise is not the best. Just you see, this is this curve saying there is a sort of an optimum just before. It is maybe this, what do you call this, perimeter blocks, etc., could be even better from a point of view of renewable energy than the super high-rise buildings. I think this is my last one. Yeah.
So it helps, but it's not the end of the story. It doesn't get us all the way to Paris.
No.
But it's a condition.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we don't connect it to all this, let's say, infrastructure, urban development, etc., then we are even
then we're moving further away. Okay. Yeah. Great. That sums it up. Question number 3. I'm going to rush you now. I'm going to rush you now. But this is something, every time I speak to a landscape architect, I ask the same question. So I'm going to keep that doing. If you look at the plans and all these plans that make Amsterdam into a densely built-up area, then a landscape architect probably, maybe that's a bit naive on my side, but a landscape architect probably would look at the same map and tell me where not to build.
Yeah.
You know, I'm an architect, I'm eager to build. Let's pretend that's the case. But you are the landscape designer and say, oh no, not there.
Yeah.
Because the biggest mistake you can make as an architect is building in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
So, are we doing the right thing?
Yes. Now we have to be aware.
That's a good short answer.
Really,
yeah. Okay.
we really have to be aware. This is a very beautiful map because this is, let's say, for the landscape, we have two maps that let's say that they're very clear and they explain everything. This is the map of the satellite map, and what you very well see is that in the northern North Holland. For instance, this what do you call this? The wedges or so from Amsterdam, the green fingers going into the city, etc. But also Haarlem has that in its northeast side and also on the coast side. But Alkmaar has this ook with the Schermer, etc. Even Hoorn has that with Schellinghout. Yeah, there is a sort of a tradition that we have this built-up area, and directly connected to that we have the landscape. And we're discovering. For instance, maybe some of you know this blind spot research from the Vereniging Delta Metropool. They are discovering that even economically this kind of landscape directly, nature near the city is a very important economic factor for let's say, enterprises in the how do you call the kennis economy, the knowledge economy we were living in, as a sort of a factor to go there. Well, that's one. And then the other thing is that we have still, this is an old map, but you recognize, for instance, the Beemster and the Purmer and the Wormer and the Schermer, but also the Omringdijk. We have still very recognizable structures that are different from each other. And these two maps, I think, from the point of landscape, are the most important, also to how to build. Then, please reckon how to take into account these structures and where to build and where not to build. Please take into account these ones.
And you came across a major mistake so far in the new plans of the city, like the first map. Say, I have one chance to warn these people.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm still advisor of the province, but you know, there is the Bloemendaal polder. I think is a mistake.
Okay.
The Bloemendaal is prominent. I think there are more slides, but let's skip it
because it's too valuable as a landscape.
This is too. No, that is even. This is in a green wedge. The Bloemendaal polder is. We can see it on the. Well, look, Bloemendaal polder is. I see. Skip all this.
Right.
The Bloemendaal polder is this. This is Bloemendaal polder. Here.
Right.
And this is in. Effectively, this is the Amstelscheg. And this is the other green, another very important green wedge, and it's in the middle of it. So
that's
we
where we should be careful.
Do that kind of things anymore. But that's that one thing about this last map. You see here, the capacity of this map is on the level of the metropolitan area is about 290,000 houses. And it is not only, do you see that there's all, you see this 96% of all the hard planned capacity is inside the built-up area from the city. The more you get to the potential locations, look there, for instance, that is the blue color, I think. No, that is the potential, sorry, it is the red color. There, 1/3 of them is outside of the built-up area. But I think it's still I'm very optimistic about that. Let's compare to the total housing demand from about 230,000 houses, that we can just put them still in this already appointed locations. Yeah, that's another thing. Yes, okay.
We have to stop here for now. I'll squeeze my last question into the second half of the evening. So
good.
Don't go away.
No, only.
Don't go away. Thank you so much. Okay. So we know. We know who our clients are, and we know where not to build, and we know how to help sustainability in this city. So that's not a bad start for the beginning of the evening.
Good.
Would you please welcome KU's from London? Yes.
You want some water, Kenny? Maybe.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say how humbled I am that you're doing this event in English because of me. So thank you very much.
Well, it gives us a chance to show off, you know, so don't worry about it.
Well, I am impressed, really, really impressed, actually. So,
thank you for coming over. And obviously, since you are from London, the first question has to do with comparing. It has to do with comparing the Amsterdam situation to the London situation we are from. You're not a stranger in Amsterdam because you know your way around, and you made some studies, so you have the talent and the intelligence to compare. And you prepared a number of slides, and we agreed that it'll go very, very quickly.
Very quickly.
So please pay attention. And after that, it's easier, and there's a context in which I can ask my question. So if you go through your images at the speed that you find plausible.
Fine. So I just wanted to give a little bit of London context, because I think it's always interesting to look over the fence and see what other people are doing. We have to provide 2.35 million new places for people to live in Greater London by 2041. We're under a lot of pressure, but globally the pressure's there. It's not just London, it's the whole world. 70% of us will be living in cities by 2050. The population of London fell after the war. Lots of people moved to the suburbs, very similar to in Holland, and we've only just reached the levels of the 1930s. But of course, people lived in much denser families with more children and in smaller accommodation than they do now. So we're all demanding bigger accommodation, more space, and that's what we all require. So that's the challenge. In the Thatcher era, prior to that, we had a Greater London Authority that would oversee the planning in London, but that was abolished. And in order to bring investment into London, our first sign of high-rise buildings was Canary Wharf, which was developed in the late 80s, commercially led, American-style development, not for housing and residential, but it was our first taste of something very large. Subsequently to that, in the 2000s, we really stopped developing housing, other than smaller developers developing things. There was no coherent plan. So the Olympics and probably King's Cross were the next coherent plans that have come about in London, where we've looked at extending the city to other places. The Olympic Park's about resolving housing and new accommodation around a park. But the densities that we're looking to achieve are based on transport nodes. So because we don't have an overall guiding body for this, we have transport nodes, and according to those transport nodes and how frequent the trains are and the buses, we have different densities. So the densities for central London can get very high. These are habitable rooms per hectare, and then at the bottom here, you can see we're going up to 405 units per hectare, which is high. So the pressure is on, particularly in central London locations. This is a map of the boroughs of London. So each of these boroughs independently makes its own planning decisions based on those policy criteria. And the result of that was that in 2015, the New London Architecture Centre, which is very similar to Arkham, did a study across the capital to see how many tall buildings were resulting from that. And a tall building, in our terms, is anything over 20 stories. What they discovered was that there was about 297 tall buildings being generated across London, and they were pepper-potted across the city. So where all of these different locations are, there are numbers, if you can't read them. So, for example, near the curve in the river, Greenwich Peninsula, there were 54. But even further out, up in the north, there are 18. So not a coherently planned way of developing housing. The result of that has been something really dramatic in London. So this is the Greenwich Peninsula. This is a plan that was developed for the London Development Agency originally, and this was the master plan. It was sold, so it was public land, and then it was sold privately. It's now owned by a Hong Kong company. Building to those densities, this is the new plan for, and it has been approved for Greenwich. So our city is changing very radically, although the population haven't seen it yet. This gives you another indication of the tall buildings that are planned, happening across London. The only really, well, it's not the only restricting factor. This is a sort of also a game of commerce, so that since 2000, well, prior to 2008, a lot of money has been coming to London, a lot of foreign money, because it's a safe city, so that's also driven the tall buildings as investments. One of our protecting factors is that to protect the heritage, we have these viewing lines. One can argue how well they work, but they do at least create a sort of pattern within the tall buildings that are emerging in the city. So these are the viewing corridors that are to be maintained. But I thought these are some of the images from NLA. So this is in the centre of London. You can see the Millennium Wheel next to Blackfriars Bridge. And these are the buildings that are actually in planning at the moment and being built. This is the city as it is, and these tall buildings are, of course, a response to Canary Wharf because they didn't want the commerce to move out east. And there are some very lovely buildings like the Gherkin there, but the next phase is this, and that there is a lot of, these have planning consent, so they are being built. So you can see, you know, the effect on London is dramatic and not visible at the moment. There are 455 tall buildings in process, and at the moment there are 100 on site in London. Of course, the difference is that we don't have a development-led system or a planning-led system as you have here. We have what we call a development control system. So that means that a developer can apply and then see what they can get. Interestingly enough, one of our most iconic buildings has landed in a place that had no policy origins. So it was purely the drive of the speculator to get this building built. But this is one of the successes. But I think in London there's going to be a backlash against tall buildings politically, although the reasons for the fire are not purely because it's a tall building, it's sticking in people's consciousnesses. And when Renzo Piano, who designed the Shard, also proposed something called the Paddington Pole in West London, that was refused, and they had to put in a new submission. So there's a changing emphasis in London. We've got a lot of tall buildings, but there's an awful lot of reflection about how they fit into our built environment and the effect that they'll have on the city. So I think that was to give you insight into another environment, I think, first of all.
Thanks. Well, it teaches us that if we talk in Holland about challenges, there's always a city in which the challenges are a lot bigger than we know. So we think we have a problem to solve. But if you look at the pictures there, it's the bigger step. Now, something when we spoke on the phone struck me when you said there's a couple of things about urban design practice in Amsterdam that I'd like to point out, because they differ from the practice in London, and they make things here possible where London fails to do that, and they make things different than they happen in London. Could you clue us in on that?
Well, I think I've already described them to some extent. The difference is that you actually do have an urban design department who oversee, and on behalf of the population of Amsterdam are thinking about where you're going to provide new housing and planning for it. And I think that that's something that is incredibly valuable. And we have a commercially led development control process where we're waiting for somebody to come along and make a a proposition, and then we are then kind of working with that proposition to see if we can adjust it to fit our needs in the city. So the first thing I'd say is that, I have huge admiration for the Dutch planning system, where they are seeking to solve the problems that you have of higher populations. I think the other major aspect is that in London, the land is not owned by the council or the public. So land ownerships mean that it is only private developers who are going to bring things forward, and that's actually historically always been the case. In fact, I didn't mean to show this slide, but it demonstrates the fact that we had a fire of London in 1666, and Christopher Wren proposed a new plan for London, and the one on the right was the one that happened because of the land ownership. So you have two very valuable tools here, I think, to help you solve some of these modern day problems that we don't have. I mean, we do get some spectacular buildings from our policy, like the Shard. We do. It does pressure us in different ways, but for all the good buildings that are built in central London, there are a lot of mediocre buildings that are on the periphery of London.
Thanks. That brings me to the next question, is that, when this is a discussion about large numbers and density and a city growing at a very rapid speed with large lumps of development, larger than we had experienced for a long time in this city. And the effect of that might be that a lot of this building activity, a lot of new citizens are going to live not in the center, but on the outskirts of the center or in the sub-centers. And that's where public transportation comes in, which is something that I really love about London. It actually works there, and actually people use it, and they don't need the car to get to the center. But it also brings about this phenomenon that the center of the city, I think you called it the donut city plan, the center of the city is not the place where most of the people live, but they live in a wide circle around it.
So I think the best way to address that is just to be anecdotal. So in the 1980s, if you were going out in London, you'd go to central London, you'd go to Soho. If you are young and going out now, you would probably take the Overground, which is a kind of circular line that goes around London and connects all of the lower value boroughs. And on that line, you would go to Peckham, is the place where all the 25-year-olds want to go, because that is where they can afford to live. And so what that's driven is a whole series of new districts around London which have different characters. So, it's great, actually. So I think it's a wonderful thing to have districts that have very different characteristics that are connected. But, we range in London from Hampstead, which is based around a sort of 18th century village, to Hoxton, which is the kind of raw place that everybody goes for their kind of arts night or even their stag night. So we have really different places to go. And those wider connections, making those accessible, has really changed the way that people use London.
So it would be an exercise for us to value really the outer ring of the city as much as we have a tendency to think from the center outward for ages. And in order to be really good in designing the rest of Amsterdam, we should exercise and think from the outside inward. Yeah. And to be on the west side, on the north side, on the southeast side, and just consider that as the center of our daily life.
Well, I mean, even coming to Amsterdam, the centre of Amsterdam is so crowded that I don't think it's possible to live your everyday life in there. It's very, very difficult. Even as a tourist, myself, coming out thinking, this is why I don't know if I could cope with this for a long period of time.
We came to the point that it's even difficult to be a tourist here.
Yeah, maybe.
That's the best. We can't get any further. Yeah, right.
So where I go when I come to Amsterdam is I actually catch the boat from the central station and I go north, because actually it's a nice place to go. It's easy to get to, and it's very, very central.
Right. I'll let that sink in. I'll try that. I mentioned it in the introduction, a question I needed to ask you about the political idea of the undivided city. Meaning, if we speak of it here, it is the ideal that we built, if we built and the city becomes a denser urban culture, we build for all income groups, all backgrounds, and all small families, large families, etc., etc. Now, that is a political ideal that is, nobody's against that, but the question is, of course, how are we going to do that? And how are we going to avoid separation by building, and how much of urban design is actually effective in building that undivided city or helping it along? How much of our tools are effective if you think about that theme?
Well, I think that the most important thing, and you know, I'm not an economist, but is to build the homes in the first place. So, for example, in London, we are way behind on delivering the numbers of homes that we need to. And as a consequence, the centre of London and the moving out from the centre of London is unaffordable for most people. So that creates more division than worrying too much about the different typologies, to be honest. Because if you're not building, and you're not building enough housing stock in those places, then you will get divided places. The only way that we have come around to redressing the balance is that the boroughs that I showed you, they have housing stock from the 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and they're now densifying those. So they're using it as an opportunity to take those down, densify them, build new buildings in between, to begin to meet the needs of those who can't afford to buy housing. But the British culture has been driven very much by the market and purchases of housing, as opposed to renting and low-cost renting. I mean,
which makes changing this division in the city of London or in the boroughs of London more difficult. I mean, there's up to a certain things, if I understand you correctly, that we can do as architects and urban designers, but the underlying, yes, you wave at me and I understand the sign. I'll finish my question, give you room for an answer. The underlying, there's so much only that we can do as designers. That is basically your message.
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
But I would just like to add into that the very pragmatic approach that you have of proposing new sites and deciding to develop them and creating, I think, the outline for them and then bringing commerce in to fund them is logical. What we do in London is we say, well, there's an opportunity, and the commercial developers come in and they could spend an awful lot of money trying to develop something, and it might not happen. It's not an efficient system of delivering housing for people. If you give them more certainty, you're much more likely to get the delivery that you want.
So we should be happy with the tools that we do have, and we should use them wisely.
I've got a huge amount of admiration for everything that I've visited here. So visiting Borneo, Sporenweg, Java Island, Eiberg, that so far that system has delivered housing that resonates with being Dutch, has its own unique response to its environment, and have become what I think are very well-settled, happy neighbourhoods. You know, the statistic that the Dutch have the happiest children in the world, you know, you see them in Amsterdam, and that's great. You don't see them in London so easily.
That's a great moment to leave it here for the first round and move over to Jarrik Ouburg. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions from the audience for you as well.
Ja, dat glaasje water, Jarrik.
Ja, dankjewel. Jarrik, welcome. We are descending from the landscape scale via urban design to actually architecture. And in your case, we're going to start from the inside out. So we're going to all visit your home, I think.
Yeah, it's true.
All 250 people are visitors at Jarrik Ouburg's private life.
Yeah.
Clue us in. There's a couple of images that you brought, which made me very curious in the preparation, and this is a great start. So
yeah, it's also the best drawing of my home. It's a reason that I thought to make it personal tonight. So the images that I showed are either personal or the complete opposites, more factual in data. And the reason to make it personal is what I like about being an architect is that you're able to pick a client's brain. So when we designed a restaurant, I had to become a cook in order to understand how a restaurant functions. Or I had to become a waiter to know how a person walks through the space. But what I like about the housing assignment is that we're all experts. We have all been living for our entire life. And I think that's also the reason why these debates are that popular, because it's about housing. It's about we're all experts, not temporary experts. We've become experts our entire life. So therefore, I thought it's good to make it personal and show my own personal experience as a person. And I happen to live not in a tower according to London standards, because it's only 16 floors. It's the top of an apartment building in the Rembrandt Park. And I've been living there for 10 years now. So it's the only experience I have as a resident in Amsterdam. And we started with 2, now we have 2 children. So we were living with 4 people in this apartment. And this is a drawing of my daughter Linge when she was 3 years old. And I really love this drawing. I knew immediately when I saw it, okay, this tells me something. I don't know yet what. I know, of course, that when I drew my own home as a child, it was this pitched roof with the chimney. Not vertically, but really...
smoke coming out, right.
Yeah. And here, of course, she shows the tower as a stacking of rooms, and I really love this detail of the elevator. To her imagination, it's really a room that connects everybody. But we also see the park, the Rembrandt Park, and, of course, you see a smile. So maybe that is according to
she's
your...
one of the happy children,
to your rule of the happy children in the Netherlands. This is another house, another image of a house. So this is not about density in terms of high-rise, but density in terms of square meters per person. This was the apartment that I lived in with my girlfriend in Tokyo. And every time when I look at this the drawing, I always think, did we have such a huge door? But in fact, the apartment was really that small. And before I moved in with my girlfriend, I was living in a much bigger apartment outside the city center of Tokyo. But I really consciously chose to move from a big space in a small village to a small space in a big village. I chose for the restaurants, the clubs, friends, universities, libraries. I chose for life. That was the reason why I chose for this apartment. And there's something else that always surprised me, that it was the place where we ate, where I worked, where we slept, where we had parties. When friends came over from the Netherlands, that was the place to sleep. So it was a very multifunctional space. And this idea, and even when this is a very modern apartment, this idea of this multifunctionality and how to deal with, how to live small, because this is an apartment of 18 square meters, so it was 9 square meters per person.
18, 1/8.
1/8,
right?
1/8, yeah. So if you
somebody understood 80,
18,
because that's
but then it would be a really big door.
1/8, yeah. Yes.
8, so it's 9 square meters per person. So if you, in comparison to what you said, that there were in the Netherlands and Amsterdam, all people living in big houses. Even the houses sold today, according to the NVM, so it's the agency that deals with the apartments being sold at the moment, or houses. It's 81 square meters average, and we live with 2 people average in an apartment. So it's 40 square meters every citizen of Amsterdam occupies. So it's almost 4 to 5 times as much as this. And there's a long history in how to live compact, or also how to live small. There's also a long history where in the interior is an integral part of the architecture. This is called the tokonoma. This closet where you can see with the built beam, the tree trunk, that was the place where you put your flower, with your vase with the flower showing the seasons, or the painting of your grandmother, and all the stuff that made this life possible, like the bed or the bed linen, because you would sleep on the tatami, it would be stored in the closet. So everything that makes life functional is stored. It has nothing to do with who you are, it just makes your life possible. Who you are and what your identity is as a human being is showed in this closet. And I think this is something that in the Netherlands, or we used to have this tradition of the inbuilt closet. In my apartment from the 70s, we still, this built-in closet, I think almost 50% of the walls is actually storage space. So the space that is left over is really for me, not for IKEA to tell me, oh, put here your Billy, we will store your stuff. In a way, IKEA shows the intelligence that we forgot as an architect to incorporate in our apartments. But this is a story about densification on a personal level. And I think we forget this when we talk about densification. We only think about houses, more houses, but not how many people do we have to accommodate and how much space do they need.
Did we get sloppy somehow as a Dutch urban culture? Just, you know, give us some more space, we'll have the stuff there. And because this interior picture is so precise.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we became spatially obese. We just expanded in what we needed. And it already happened to me personally when we were buying the house. This is really diversion, but we were living in Brussels before we moved to Amsterdam. And friends of mine were living in a high-rise in a park.
Brussels?
Brussels, yes. And I love the typology. So you're living high view over the city, and still there's this green area around you. And I thought, when we moved to Amsterdam, that's how I want to live. So I took the map of Google Earth. I was looking for long shadows in a park, in a green park. So it's the Rembrandt Park. And there are 9 towers, so I said, okay, one is this tower, it's more located into the park, highest apartment, this is the balcony on the south. I knew exactly, living in Brussels, the apartment that I wanted to live in. So I went to the real estate agent, I want to live there. Yeah, that's possible, okay, here's the key. I went to the hypotheker for the mortgage, and they said, yeah, but you can...
You all want to know this, right?
For the mortgage, and they tell me, yeah, but you can with this income, you can live much bigger.
Right.
I said, yeah, but I want this. This is what I need. This is what I want. Yeah, but So it already starts there. This, yeah, but you can have this. But so the question, what do you need? You don't ask yourself anymore because nobody asks you this question.
Obesity was being offered to you.
Yeah. It's like supersize.
Yeah.
Just. But living on, this is another density I think is interesting. It's not the density on the scale, on the level of the individual, but on the level of the city. Because if we look at Tokyo, it's really not a very dense city if we think about inhabitants per square kilometer. So again, not to think in dwellings per hectare, but in inhabitants per square meters. What's the density of the people? So not to see the bricks as the hardware of the city, and the people as the software, but the people as the hardware, and the buildings as the software. So I checked it, I looked it up. So the city that comes closer to the density of Tokyo in the Netherlands is Capelle aan de IJssel.
And nobody knew this, I'm sure.
And this is also another way of saying, let's say, on our way to Paris. Because Paris is, of course, a very dense city. It has 7-8 layers over a vast area. London, probably these are old figures, because when I look at your pictures, it seems to go up. But it's got to do with the size of the city, the amount of people living in the city, divided by the surface. Yeah, the surface. And then if we look at Amsterdam, I think it's also interesting, thinking about a dense city. It's only the 4th densest city in the Netherlands. Haarlem, so a place where you would go when you have children and think, okay, then we have more space, is actually more dense. And The Hague is the densest city of the Netherlands. Still,
say that again. The Hague is the most dense city in the Netherlands.
Yeah, if you think about the number of inhabitants.
Right, number of people
living within
in the city.
Yeah.
And that's not the image that we
Yeah.
all. That's not the image that we all have of density, right?
Nee, but
We never realized.
Yeah, and of course it differs per neighborhood, as you can see here in Amsterdam. So we have around 5,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. It's 10 times as much as an average Dutch municipality. But if we look here, how it's divided in the city, we see that's Amsterdam West, the city center, Amsterdam Zuid. That's dense. I think that's 15,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. So maybe that's the reason why you think that the center of Amsterdam is a bit too occupied, and you go to the north, which corresponds to this. But for example, if we talk about density and where is a good location to densify, I think New West is a very interesting spot. It's just a spot on the map of the municipality. But if I think about, Jan Dirk, your lecture, let's see, where are the nodes, where is the infrastructure, where's the connectivity? And if you think about what you said about London, it's really based on where people are connected. This is one of the best connected places in the Netherlands. We have the tram, metro, train, with the highway. Within 10 minutes you're within reach of one of the biggest international airports in Europe. So if we think about densification, I think those are different, I agree with you, different factors to mark the spot.
And it's
instead of space.
This is the scientific proof. It's not so much the looks of a part of the city, but
Yeah.
this is the actual, these are the facts.
Yeah.
The most dense area in Amsterdam is New West.
But and it's also quite interesting if you look at what are the most expensive places to live. So maybe you could say the most popular. It is Amsterdam Zuid. It is the Amsterdam Center. It's Amsterdam West. So the most densely populated places are the most popular. And that's not because people like to live that close together, but I think it's because of all the functions that come with it. It's the musea, it's the schools, it's the parks, it's the quality of life that people choose for, the densification of life, not the densification of the people, right. Everything that comes with it. This is the same graph that you showed of London. To me, it's always interesting to see this and to realize that we're now closing up, or getting closer to the number of inhabitants that the city used to have in the 60s and 70s, with less space. So much denser city in the past than it is in the present. Again, a very personal image. In my experience as an architect, we were asked to make a housing tower with very compact houses. So all our references of Tokyo were helpful with the bed stay, reintroduced the inbuilt closets and everything. So really thinking, how can we maximize every cubic meter, cubic centimeter even. We were really puzzling with this. Nice puzzle as an architect. And then I entered the elevator and I met my new neighbors. Well, at least, this was, if you can call this, meeting.
Right, getting to know.
So this is the same elevator that my daughter drew.
Yeah.
And then I realized that it's not how many people you bring together, but what's the interaction between those people, and how can an apartment building or a city be much more than the sum of its parts. And this connectivity and this collectivity is not something that you get for granted, especially not when we're now connected to social or so-called social media, or very independent from social, physical connection. And that's what I think one of the qualities of densification could be, or a surplus, that we get the collectivity and a social connectivity. And then we have to design it. You don't get it for free. And if you design it, it can work. It can work in the past and it can work now. So this is my last slide of the rooftop of the Unité d'Habitation of Le Corbusier. Many people know it. But what I didn't know when I studied the building was that the tenants of the Unité already were collectively organized and they had their own organization even before the building was completed. Because of all these collective functions, the roof terrace, the dance hall, they were thinking, what can we do with this? And still, till the day of today, they organize every year a community party on the roof to celebrate, their home. Yeah. And the fact that it still works. So this is the daughter at the age that she drew the first drawing. It still works. It's her meeting a girl living there. So I think that's something that we should, to build for people, to go from here to here. And focus more on the people and what the city is a collection of people, not only a collection of bricks. In what way?
You almost answered the questions before I asked them, but if you can connect this to these three domains that I talked about in the introduction, the private, the collective, and the public, then if I understand you well, that sometimes you feel that the private domain is being overrated, the collective domain is being neglected, and the public domain we haven't talked about yet. But the public domain is something, if of good quality, makes density possible in the first place. But your contribution is mainly on the relation between the private and the collective. Now, because this picture of these two people in the elevator, which is basically the social room of a high-rise building, and they're not communicating with each other. That is also the picture of a problem. And if you speculate on how to develop buildings that work well in a densely built-up urban environment, then my guess is that you would pay a lot of attention on the collective quality, the quality of the collective program. So, for instance, why is it necessary for everybody to have their own laundromat? If you can have a collective room and do something together and do it in a clever way so that Jan Dirk is happy as well. Why is it necessary to make the hallway of a residential building as small as possible, where you would like to do, etc., etc. So there's a sort of underrating and not understanding in Dutch architecture of apartment buildings what the collective of the building actually can do for inhabitants in a dense populated area. Yeah, true.
Well,
it's not really a question, right? No, well, it is a question. The question is that correct? Is that what you, if you work on those buildings, concentrate on?
Yeah, I think it's even on a bigger level. If we're not convinced that the collectivity is a quality for the individual, and that we all here together, the fact that we are crammed together is a quality for ourselves, then the city is doomed. So that's the reason why we live in the city, because we share it. If we want to have everything for our own, we would not be here. Not tonight, we would not live here. But I think that's something that we have to not forget: design, incorporate, enhance. And I think it's on the level of a building, this collectivity, or this, but also how can a building be a public space, not only a space for the people that live there. There are many, take for example the Andreas Ensemble, close to my neighborhood. Well designed architecture as well, it's 100% housing. So it's actually a part of the city extracted from the city instead of a part of the city added to the city. I have nothing to go, there's nothing for me there.
You never have to be there unless you live there, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really on the level of urbanism, but even architecture, so we should always think, what do we add to the city instead of how can we extract as much from the city? And then densification is a surplus also for the city itself.
Right. So the collective quality is a necessity, and the public realm is really the celebration of wanting to live in the city. That's why you go to the theater, that's why you go to the plaza, etc., etc.
And it's also with the functions that we have to add to the areas that are now called, not really considered as Amsterdam. Take, for example, New West. I think it's a very good development that the Amsterdam Museum is thinking of opening a dependance in New West, so that also the cultural institutes say, but this is Amsterdam, because we can ask tourists to say, no, don't don't to your,
Don't go.
yeah. Go to the west. But even if we don't go there ourselves, no, yeah.
Right. It has to do with, you know, there's two types of growing up here I hear you talk about. One is the growing up of the tower as a building type, or the high-rise residential culture. And the other one is growing up of the outer parts of the city as fully operational urban contexts, and not just residential neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So if we do those two things well, and we listen to Kay's lessons, sorry.
Everything will be all right.
Everything will be all right. Yeah. So I think that's a reassuring conclusion of the first part of tonight. But you've been dying to ask questions. And there's one practical thing that I'd like to ask you. If you have a question, please direct the question directly to one of the three interviewed. That makes it easier for me. And if you have no idea who the question is to, then I'll do something about it. The floor is yours, because I heard the bell go. So we have actually the amount of time that I envisioned for our debate. Ladies and gentlemen, you should have some light up there as well, so we can see you, and you cannot only see us. The first question, is there anybody who's been dying to ask one? Nobody at all? All scary people. Yes, all the way in the back. There's a microphone coming to you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jarrik Ouburg. I'm an architect here in Amsterdam. I have a question for Khaa. You were making very large compliments on, let's say, our planning tradition that we have in Amsterdam. Yet, really, today, actually this day, we are facing, let's say, the same problem as what London is facing, has been facing. Let's say the big areas that we can, let's say, as a city, freely plan, make really big master plans, kind of is over, because all of these areas are kind of done. So what we are now facing is we have a lot of brownfields, which have a lot of, let's say, diverted ownership. What lessons do you have for us as a city? How should we deal with this? Because actually we are now facing what London has been facing for 40 years. How do we not enter into this trap that it's going to be one big bang of big tall buildings bringing nothing to the city? Do you have an advice for us?
Well, I suppose that's where our development control as opposed to planning-led system can work, where you then put in a sort of quite tight regime on those areas of what you will allow to see built. And then you don't allow developers to develop things that are in outline and in form, but then you have to monitor the process in a lot more detail to see that it's approved in the way you want it to. But then, of course, that also relies on the fact that you come to a compromise that is commercially viable, that also delivers your objectives. So you end out in a much more in a dialogue on not on what is right for the population and the people you're providing for, but on how you can meet the commercial objectives and at the same time deliver the housing that you need and find those additional facilities. So we have a design review process that's only really started in the last 5 or 6 years. But on the tall buildings, you know, one of the things we're always looking at is communal space within the building. And the things that we focus on are the public realm and the spaces and the areas that connect to the buildings, whether they're commercially developed or not. Almost in a way, they're providing the housing. If you start to focus on the public realm more, then you begin to bring it into the city rather than it being a sort of individual kind of conception that's put in place. I know there was quite a lot of work done in Wood Wharf, where developers were looking to, in London, to fill their plots to the edges. But it actually takes designers to say, well, if you fill all your plots to the edges, you don't get an environment that you can sell. So I think the other thing is that people don't want to buy things that are too low spec. They don't want to buy things that are too dense. They don't want to buy things that have windows that look from one side to the other. So I think that's the other perspective on it. I think the challenge with those, though, is it depends if it's for sale or whether it's for rent and what the commercial decisions around that are. If it's for rent, then there's, and the developer's building it to rent the property, then they've got a lot more incentive in making it durable and long-term than they do if they're going to just sell it.
Does that answer your question? For starters?
Yes, of course. It's a discussion that we're having here in Amsterdam as well. I'm kind of happy to see that the same process is happening in London. But maybe we should talk a bit, because you're more mature in it than we are in Amsterdam.
I have a question.
Kate's got a question.
I've got a question.
You've got a question.
I have a question.
Okay, good.
No, I have a question for you. Because you talked about older people staying in their houses and moving them out, and that's also an issue we all face. Not trying to get old people out of their houses, but in London,
it sounds a bit cruel.
Property has become an investment vehicle. So you won't sell your house, even if you may be slightly unhappy there and you can't look after it, because the value of it is increasing all of the time. So the mechanism to move people to smaller, more social environments where they can co-look after each other, support each other, generate those social contact that they need. Have you had any thoughts about how that happens? Because that, for me...
Why do you ask so very difficult questions to me?
Shall I answer it?
Yeah, do it. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm free for the rest of the night. Go ahead. Yeah.
Then I take the next question.
Yeah. That's the deal. Then I'll buy you a drink. We have a big tradition of social housing in the Netherlands. So there's also a lot of people renting space. So you're right, it's very difficult to kick somebody out of their house when they own it, and they can just wait till they it becomes more worthy. So the erfenis, what's the name of it?
Erfenis.
Heritage.
The heritage. So the children becomes higher. But in terms of social housing, we have this discussion of
inheritance.
That's again a wrong word. Scheef wonen, but that you
incongruent living.
That you allocate it to a house which actually your income is too high. The people, they start to live there with a modest income. Their income increases, but they stay to live in the house. It's actually not allocated to them. I think if you could have the same mechanism for square meters. Okay, you rent this apartment when you're with 4 people, then your children move out of your house. Then you should not have the right to live there anymore because you occupy too much space.
We've tried that.
It's the same.
No, the Conservatives brought in what they called the so in social housing. They put in what they called the added room premium. So your rent went up. So if you had one person living in a 3-bedroom apartment, their rent would go up, and then that would force them to move. I mean, politically, it was very unpopular.
Could
but
the answer,
I would say that the part of London I live in is a third privately rented, a third social housing, and a third owned, which is unusual. It did mean that we had younger families moving in because bits of the city become stale if they don't move and people don't. And you know,
and inaccessible for young families.
it's the wealthy who can afford to say, well, when I'm a bit older, I think I'll go and live in central London in Barbican, because that's a lovely architectural place to go and live. But it's not everybody who has that choice. And I think one of the issues you were talking about is that we need housing that is different at all different ages. Mm-hmm. And somehow we've got into a market where people aren't flexible about moving home.
Not anymore, you mean?
Well, yes, they stay where they are. They don't move.
Well, the start of solving the problem, that's what I meant, if we talk about density and densifying the city, then that is a great opportunity to build what is not yet there, and to build for groups, because of course some people see their house as an investment and don't have an ambition to move, but that doesn't go for everybody. There's lots of people, if you offer them something better, something that fits more, they would move. But it starts, of course, with the city being able to provide these people with an alternative. Yeah. We cannot force anybody out if we don't have an address, even forcing, but invite people to think about another address if the address is not available. So it starts with us, with the city and the planners and the designers, to make something that somebody else in a new urban context actually wants. Not is being driven to, but actually wants. But and that is a question about quality.
I think the surplus of space available within the city is shown by an organization like Airbnb.
Yes.
So you have a couple that rents a space of 70 square meters, or let's say there's 80 square meters that we occupy. It has 2 rooms and this room for a child. They don't get a child, becomes a study room, they don't study, it's just an extra room. And then comes Airbnb. We can make money with this room. So then people rent this space through Airbnb, and all of a sudden, instead of 2 people leaving the front door, it's 3 people leaving the front door. But the apartment was designed for 3 people leaving the front door. And now all of a sudden we say, oh, it's very dense in the city. No.
It was meant for this.
This was meant for this density.
Meant for this, right. Yeah. Can we go to the next question? Because otherwise we're going to have a wonderful evening down here, but you're not part of it. I'm looking into the light. Yes, there's an arm there. Can somebody with the microphone go to the middle of the middle row?
Hi, my name is Bas Horsting. I'm an architect and urban planner. I have a question which addresses all of you. In London, a couple of years ago, the London Green Grid was published. I think as a measure from the city to counterbalance development and to ensure enough green space, enough quality of green space, and also recognizing the social, environmental, and economic value of green infrastructure for the city. I was wondering, as a question to you, Khaa, is that system sort of working for the city? And I think addressing also to the other people on stage, could it be an example to have green infrastructure sort of like counterbalancing or maybe even guiding development on high-rise in Holland? Because I've seen the London Green Grid is now being adopted by a lot of cities around the world. Moscow are doing it, Sydney are doing it. Many are taking an example in that. And I was wondering if Amsterdam had a stance on that and also if it was working.
So the London Green Grid, if you don't know what it is, it started off with a lot of London housing is resolved around different small parks, and also in some of the areas of regeneration, like the Lee Valley, that were industrial land, there was an opportunity to make them greener. So they came up with this concept of the green grid. So it's been a gradual kind of development of connecting the green spaces together so that they all start to connect together. And I heard this morning they're going to start sort of rebranding it as London as the park with the green in it.
You laugh because that's a different thing.
Well,
a green grid and a park are not the same.
I think
not
it's
the same qualities.
Stretching ideas.
Yes,
slightly,
okay. Yeah.
For image reasons.
But then
but it has become a very valuable concept and tool to develop those areas. And it's also made us take a much more free approach to greenery and connecting things together. So it has generated a whole series of walks and connections that we didn't have before, which have been really valuable, connecting people, you know, through walking to different places.
And realized and invested by the municipality.
Yes, well, I mean, we also, with all of these big developments that we have something called Section 106, which is where they pay a community interest levy to build, and so that money is then put into that infrastructure.
Yeah. It's adding quality and green quality in areas which are already there, right? It's very small-scale transformation with a very large-scale effect.
Yeah.
So if we translate that to the thing that we're trying to solve here, should we make it to start with? This green structure around which all this densely built up area, should we start at the green side? It's this question we discussed in the beginning.
Well, I suppose, you know, if you're talking about the characteristics of Amsterdam as opposed to the characteristics of London, and I started mine off by saying we are a city that's resolved around these green spaces. If I think about central Amsterdam, that's a city that's made of houses that are all narrowly packed together without green. And actually, when I went to visit the developments that you have, so the newer developments, Borneo, Sporenberg and IJ-oever, what you have instead is you have perimeters which relate to the water that we don't have. So in a weird way, I think your garden is the water and our garden is the greenery. And that is part of the characteristic difference between the cities.
Yeah. Would you support that?
Yes. Maybe there's some, because I saw a map from the city, I think, from the municipality that also had to do with cycling routes, and this also had sort of a green thing, but maybe somebody from the municipality does know this better than me, but maybe some explanation about it. But I think this is another difficult question, I think, you know, this high-rise densities, etc., and the green infrastructure of the city. Because in generally spoken, I think, but it is more a sort of an intuition, that we should soften our public space.
Soften it?
Yeah. We should put water, trees, etc. in it. That is, and also for sustainable reasons, for water capacity also, but for heat, etc. All this climate change thing about heat stress, etc., etc. And that is, when you look to Amsterdam and to the densities that Jarrik showed us also, how can we afford this kind of space also in this let's say very compact, dense stone city? And that also puzzles me a bit, you know, where do we have because of course we have the Vondel parks and all this very nice big public space, etc., but when we have this kind of a green grid for Amsterdam, I would be curious on how and where and how, but I think I've got a good feeling that it's important to work on that, to be sustainable for the future, etc.
There's one fabulous example, which is Westerpark. Westerpark is one of the most successful public spaces done in Amsterdam for the last 15, 20 years. And it's not only a wonderful place for everybody on the west side of town to go to, it is also something that makes it possible for areas around it to become urban, thanks to the fact that Westerpark is a success.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Soften the things that we're still going to do, but also taking care of the things that make building around it possible. Right?
No, be very precise where not to build. Have a vision where not to build instead of only showing a map where to build.
Yes, that's how we started the evening.
Because otherwise, I think it will take a lot of ease into the discussion. Because where does it end?
And there's maybe a lucky thing, because there also, and also this is speculation, and there needs far more research, etc. But I saw this. The Boston consulting group has done some investigation on the effect of electric cars and self-driving cars, etc. in public space eastern USA cities, Boston, Philadelphia, etc., etc. And they're even, well, it was maybe very optimistic, but they said that even the traffic space could, and the parking, the driving, rolling cars and parked cars, it could even be reduced by 50%.
50% by
so
half.
that can maybe also, for in this perspective of this greener, of where to build and where to have our soft, nature-like, etc. Structure, could also help maybe.
Right.
It could be.
Does it answer your question, sir?
Perfect.
Does it come close to an answer? Yes, there's more questions. Please, the microphone in the middle here. Yes. Oh, you have it already.
I saw one of the pictures, the very dense population in the western part of Amsterdam, New West, and that was exactly a perfect example of a perfect balance between green and buildings by Van Eester in his general extension plan. You have to look in the book of Vincent van Rossum to realize that. And what we now are doing is exactly the opposite. We are ruining that green structure, the walking routes through the western part of Amsterdam, and make it dense. And I know why that's happening, but it's exactly the opposite of what we are discussing here.
And your question is pointed to, okay, who's the lucky one?
Perhaps we should reconsider the densification of that western part and try to realize there what we are now trying to realize in the more central part of Amsterdam. Quite a question.
West and not New West.
New West, the housing areas around the Sloterplas.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It's west outside of the ring. That's what. And you said the quality of it is a dense. Well, there's density, but there's also.
No, it had a certain density, of course. There were lots of people who had to find a house there, but the last years we see a tremendous densification of that area at the cost of the original well-balanced green structure in it.
Ah, so you're worried about the heritage of Van Eester. That is basically something that you put on the agenda?
Only to learn something from that, to reconsider what we are doing in the central part of Amsterdam.
Right. But now the map that we showed all the way in the beginning, it shows all the activities that the urban designers of the city are employing to meet this large number of new inhabitants and new houses.
Yes.
And a very small amount of that energy goes into the Van Eester area. And a very large amount of energy goes into the transformation of parts of the city which are not yet full of that character. So I understand your worries, but the big things are taking place somewhere else as far as I interpreted the map. But maybe you have a better answer to this. Are we going to densify things, parts of characters of the city, that we should be more careful with? That's basically what your question is about, right?
Well, I live in the area, so I live on the ring road, so it's really on the crossing between Oud West and Old West and New West. And we made a plan for the area where our office is. It's really on the crossing of the Jan Evertsestraat and the ring road A10. And in the beginning we had discussions with the municipality, and they really wanted to have uitrol centrumgebied. So how can we expand the qualities of the city center outside the ring? So it meant that the Jan Evertsestraat should have the same profile wherever it would go, from the Dam Square to the Sloterplas. And when I now leave the city center, I'm actually relieved to enter this open space. So it's almost, how can we invert it? So it's the inroll suburb gebied. So I agree it has a quality, but I don't agree that we should not build at all, because there's a lot of public spaces just, or yeah, you can't even, let's say, openbare ruimte. In Dutch you can really say openbare ruimte en openbare leegte. So it's public emptiness. There are a lot of spaces where the green space is not shared. The functions are not on the right spot. Let's say on the ground floor there are the cellars. And I think there's a huge potential in that area to be transformed, to be densified. So also the vacant green spaces become actually used in the way Van Eesteren envisioned it.
So you can, your position is you can densify this area, this particular urban character, without changing that character. Because you were opposed to designers who said, we'll make an inner city type of character in this 20th century part of the city. You shouldn't do that, but you can do something else that actually makes the qualities from the 1950s even better than they are now. Okay. As long as the instrument is very refined.
Yeah, and precise. Yeah, you have to work within the existing fabric. It's not a clean...
Right, it's not a white sheet. Yeah. Okay.
Something about density.
Yes. You need a microphone so everybody else can understand you.
I'm Bas Kok, writer from Hoogbouw aan het IJ, a book about Amsterdam North. And we neglect actually one figure of your scheme, the density. When you talk about the density question, there was one conclusion that was totally overwhelming. That was the low density of Amsterdam North. Actually, Amsterdam North would be the subject a little bit of this evening. So when you said New West is very logical to expand, then I say, well, I don't agree because we have Amsterdam East, we have Amsterdam South, we have Amsterdam North, and you mustn't say there's New West and West because it's West. And then we have the overwhelming big Old West that's compensating New West. So that's actually equal. There's one and really only one part of Amsterdam that is extremely low density. Talking about density, there's only one conclusion, that Amsterdam North, there is the biggest possibility and potential.
And
when there's a bridge.
And which right, I grant you the bridge, but does that mean, is that something that you love to see coming? Or is that something that you worry about? Because you are living in North and you're the advocate of everything that's good about the North part, but densification in a way that the character, the typical character of that part of the city is getting better and not disappearing.
I'm not afraid of densification, and I'm longing to the infrastructure. Yeah. So densification is never a problem when there's transport. Yeah. So that's the point of Khaa said. You need transport, and then that's the important thing. Right. So densification without transport, of course not, but densification with transport, of course, yes.
Great. Good news from the north part of town. Yes, Kay.
Well, years ago, I worked on a project in Bangkok, and it was actually an embassy building, and it had moved from the post office in the 1930s that was in the centre of Bangkok. And they'd bought a paddy field from somebody called Nylert that was out in the middle of nowhere, and everybody thought they were completely mad. Well, by the time I went there in 1997, that was the central business district of Bangkok. And to me, logically, looking at the map of Amsterdam, Central Station is the centre. And I imagine that if you were to come back here in 40, 50 years' time, that would be the centre, and the other side would develop. And if it's going to develop, it needs to develop to much higher densities than it is now. And it's a corollary with the South Bank in London, which after the war, the South Bank was originally swampland. There was nothing much there. The war bombed any of the buildings that were there. And so the whole redevelopment of the South Bank was a construct to develop that area to the south, and you know, it's been very successful, and it's logical because it's so close. But the connections between the north and the south do need to be substantially improved for that to happen.
Yeah, you said when I'm a tourist in Amsterdam, I go not in the center, but I go north. And you said because it's so near the center.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit true, but it's also not true because when you don't build infrastructure, then it's not really near. Yeah. So that's the point.
Well, I do it because the boat runs from, you know, the station. So
yeah, that's,
but I
that's
think
true.
if you were to live here and you were to go further up, to get round is more difficult. We came, a group of us came on our bikes and we went round the northern part with Jan Peter van Vingende, and he took us on a route. But of course, by the time we managed to get back down to Eiburg, we'd gone a really long way round and over a bridge because there aren't that many connections. Yeah.
But this densification of north, because I'm going to rephrase your question because I like to, but this possible densification of north, granted that we are able to get there, because otherwise it's not densification but isolation. But suppose we'd done that, we fixed it, then it would be not densification in the northern part exactly the same way as the Sluisbuurt, exactly the same way as the Hamerstraatkwartier, exactly the same way as Haven City. So my hope would be that we'll find designs, ways, building types, public space arrangements, so that that particular densified part of North would be something else, some other urban quality than the ones around it. And if we are able to do that, if we have the communal intelligence to do that, then the city will be an urban area, but a city of contrasts, and not a city of the same everywhere. So, yes, is there any support for that? Yes.
I would just say...
That was my point.
I have lots of support for that, but I would just say don't lose your nerve, because all of the developments you've done to date have been developed by people who live and know the city well and want to see it structured with a similar character. Be it tall or be it low, that's irrespective. What is always disappointing to see is the sort of importing of the trophy architects. You know, the Frank Gehry story that's happened everywhere all over the world. And I think that's the thing that you should try and avoid. I think you have already demonstrated, you know, the Depression was bad for the industry, but it was great in other ways because you've all exported your skills globally, and you know you have a great industry, and you know it's time to bring it back here and reinvent it in Amsterdam.
So don't lose your nerve means be proud of the level of quality that you have, and keep building the way that it fits your city.
Yeah. But
we don't need a Frank Gehry, not the man. It's not, but we don't need international architecture to raise the quality, to raise the level of quality.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind, because there's rumors that we need more icons, more architectural icons to make the city more special than it is, and that's when I do lose my nerve a little bit.
Yeah. You know, it depends how far the icons go, and I think if you're going to build big icons and tall spaces, you have to be very careful and judicial about where you pick the spaces. But at the end of the day, that's only ever going to be a very small part of the story, and the bigger part of the story, because, as you were saying, housing needs to be for a whole series of different people, so tall buildings, mid-rise buildings, lower buildings, they're all going to be part of the story. There's not one. There's not one game in town.
And it's not the building, but it's the complete environment. It's the quality of everything together. Okay, that's reassuring. Questions from you up there?
Sorry.
Yes. We'll get to you in a minute. Sorry.
I want to get into this discussion. I'm Remy Vlek, a comrade of Mr. Kok from the North Republic. which is
comrades from the North Republic.
Yeah, of course.
It's a specific color.
So we make a film about under the title "Who Owns the Eye," which is going to be in premiere on the end of November. But my point will be this: that it's not a question but a remark. I think about the density in the north of Amsterdam. You should consider that a city building is not about bricks. Making a city is about meeting, about diversity, about emancipation. Those are the three elements which are very basic for building a city. And those elements are very good now coming up in what was before the poor side of Amsterdam. So the density, yeah, it's okay, but you should ask, how can you build a city on a human scale? And what can you organize to let it happen that way? And I think I missed that point a little bit, because it's not the architect who is working to that, it's the people who are organizing that. And I think the system in the north of Amsterdam, especially since the last 20 years, has proven that civilians are very close to the city council, which is now abolished, unfortunately. And that people are organizing their own environment, like in the Buiksloterham, and also in cooperations, small cooperations, which are an alternative for the big corporations as we know them, although they were established by the unions 100 years ago. So we should pick up those signs and let's play the game together in building the city. That's, I think, for organizing the city, that's a thing which must be happening.
So diversity and the prime role of the citizens themselves. So it's not just a dance between politicians, planners and builders and investors, but it's the citizens themselves.
Yeah, because there's
comrades.
Yeah. No, but the time now, it's not like a free choice. It's, I mean, the urgency of the climate change, the urgency of the lack of energy, of transformation of energy, the earthquakes in the north, you know, the water coming to Holland as well, although it's happening now in the Caribbean. But all those things need to take care and to appeal to the civilians and to the professionals to work together on a small scale. And with knowledge about alternative energy, alternatives in building houses, not only new material, but rebuilding. All those lessons, and also the lessons of the crisis. I mean, we interviewed Maarten van Poelgeest, the old councillor of the city, and he said that nowadays the city is working with about 150 parties, developers, corporations, civilians to build, to develop. While 10 years ago, these were about 8 parties. So that's another lesson.
Okay, lesson understood. Incorporate the citizens and their personal initiatives. That would make North even stand out if that would develop into actually characteristics as they do in the Buiksloterham. It would make North even more particular than it is already.
I think
and that's a good part. Yes.
I think the point is right. Do we see this densification as a chance for the market to make money, or do we see the densification of the city as a chance, to create a new social structure? So living in the city becomes affordable for as much people as possible. So that means that the teacher doesn't have to come from Almere to teach in Amsterdam, but can live in the north or in west. So I think that's a division line that I see quite clearly now.
Okay, thank you. Support from here. Yes, there was an arm there. Yes, and you're already waiting for a long time. The microphone is coming your way.
Yeah, Hans van der Made, I'm urban planner in working for the city, and I have a question which relates to the last remark, a question for Jan-Dirk Hoekstra, which showed an intriguing loading capacity map for the housing in the metropolitan region. Then if the situation is that the city has better possibilities for densification and dense areas, has it been in discussion on the province level to certain types of distribution of density. You could give the city a higher task, more dense areas, more housing in the city. City can easily adapt 150,000 of your houses, meaning that the qualities of the landscape you are advocating could be kept. If you compare the situation around Rotterdam and Amsterdam, the situation, the open landscape in Rotterdam has gone, and we still have it. And I think it would be better to give the city a higher task. It must be clear.
Yeah. Well, I don't know well enough if the province really suggested that, but I think that it should be. We're making a sort of a story now about landscape in North Holland, and what I showed, the image of the satellite, etc., and this big landscapes directly connected to the city. I think this is very important. And there are a few cities or cities, urban areas in the metropolitan area of Amsterdam that can, of course, develop quite dense plans in there. For example, Haarlem, I think, could also do. But especially Amsterdam, but I don't know exactly about how high, etc. we should do. But what was for me was quite consolating is that the number of developed spots or building locations was even higher than the question, let's say, than the housing demand so far. And well, I don't know exactly if this is the question to your answer, Hans, but no. But yes, I'm still puzzling about density. Is what we do tonight is that we add some qualities to density, and that's what confused me also a bit answering this question. You know, it's not about high rise or density on itself. We just add now qualities like it should be mixed. There's this mixed development of income groups and different kind of people, etc., etc. Then we should look for differentiation, like north should be, the densification in north should be others than the densification in the west, etc., etc. We should add this, what you said, Jarrik, this connectivity and connection. We should add something instead of only consuming space. And then, and from that point of view, and there was even another thing, let's look if people, how far people can develop their densification projects themselves. I think when you add all these things, then I think, well, if we manage to realize that sort of dense locations, I would be. Let's say that's what I kept from this discussion. Yeah. And then back to the numbers of Hans. I think, well, then maybe numbers are even not so very important as long as they meet this kind of qualities. Everything could be solved. What puzzles me still is also that I keep in mind a bit confused is that can we steer this? Do we have enough? Regulation and
instruments to do
and
that.
Instruments and good developers and nice neighborhoods, and so there are people that want to go for it, but also regulations, etc., and finance to do this. I think this is maybe more criteria than the province said. Well, Amsterdam do twice as dense, for instance.
Well, the beginning you just pointed out very clearly. The beginning is to understand density as an ambition of quality. And if we are ambitious enough, then the quantity is something that is following that. It's not the other way around. Yeah. It doesn't answer Hans's question at all, but it's a good thing to say out loud. Ladies and gentlemen, we have room for two or three more questions, urgent questions. Floor. Yes, there is a microphone. Of course there is. But where? All the way down here, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. My name is Floor Aons. I was sort of puzzled tonight because if we start to densify the city in this amount of houses around the city center, and what Kay described from London is starting to happen, that actually you get a sort of a multi-centered city. What is the vision on the connection between all those new areas? Because what you say, there's a lot of concentration on connecting to the city center, but so far I didn't see any studies or plans on how to connect all these new kind of centers.
In Amsterdam or in London?
In Amsterdam.
Okay. And you're asking Kay?
Or anybody.
It's refreshing. Yeah.
Is there any studies on this?
I don't know. Maybe Hans can say something about it. But no, but I think it's very, because you can say, well, we solve everything and this on the level of the location, on the green or the red or the yellow spot, etc. But I think you have to continuously, indeed, you have to continuously go around in these levels, because that's what struck me from Kate's story. That's like the young people are now very well. Hey, I have to be here for this, because there's sort of a generic London image of this commercial town where everything is about the same, so there's all these spots, and then there seems to be quite differentiated locations, very interesting, but people know exactly, I have to be there and there and there and there, and I think this differentiation always needs also a sort on some higher level, what you say, programming, casting, incentives, etc.
So local identity.
So
and of course a perfect public transportation system, because
of course, yep.
if you looking for the rules of this densification, then the first thing you look at is how to get there, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. But what strikes me, for instance, if you look now at the ringspoorszone, then all the connections are about connecting to the city center instead of the let's say the vertical connections, north-south connections. And to me it's very strange, because still everybody is sort of divided in that sense.
That's old urbanism, and new urbanism should be geared on something else. Is that your point?
Well, we should take this in consideration, because otherwise we get so concentrated on Central Station being the center point of the city.
Right.
But there's lots of other connections.
That's the exercise we talked about earlier. Think from the outside inward.
So
not inward. Go around.
Yeah. Or around. Right. Not even inward. Yeah.
Peter?
Yes.
So could I just say our sort of outer circle, which is called the overground, was actually a sort of connection of old railway lines that had existed, and then they made the new connections to connect it all together. And as soon as they were connected, all of those areas have really flourished and become the new centres on the donut ring that they weren't before. And it's made a huge difference to where people can live in the city. There were areas that they wouldn't go and live before, but they do now. I think one of the questions that, particularly with the Olympic Park, that you have is, if the municipality invest in the infrastructure, how do they reap the benefits that the commercial operators take from that investment? Because, for example, in London, we planned the park, but all the way around the edges, people were benefiting from the uplift in land, but there's no way of reciprocating that and saying, well, you're building that, you'll make some money, so you pay it back into this pot that's creating the infrastructure in the first place. Right. So then the only other way of doing it is that you get the developers together and say, well, your land will go up in value if you connect these places together, and you get them to pay for it, which is kind of what happened with Canary Wharf. They built, if anybody's gone to City Airport, which I'm sure you all have, and you get the little line in, I mean, it's like going on a kind of tinker toy into London, but it's a cheap tinker toy that goes because
certainly dwarfs
it was commercially driven very early on, and they didn't want to spend much money on it, but it works. It's a bit irritating, but since then, you know, it's been worth putting.
Still, it's a lifeline.
Other connections
but if you would compare this to Tokyo, it was the developers that owned the railway.
Yeah.
And they made a stop. It had a station, and from there a city started. So it was not even if they managed to do that. Yeah. Then you start at the beginning.
Okay, we have room for 2 more questions. I'm counting down. Yes, sir. A microphone. he's here.
Hallo, ik heb een vraag.
Oh, okay. I won't forget you. Yes.
Ron uit Omen, Amsterdam. Ik heb 2 vragen, kort.
Tricky.
Eén over de... Oh, sorry. I'll switch to English. I have 2 questions, quite briefly. The figures about density within the center of Amsterdam, are all the hotel rooms or tourists visiting Amsterdam also applied within these density figures, or is it just the people who actually live here, so who are basically renting a house? And the other question is more of a, well, environmental discussion. You were talking about a sort of, say, a green sleeve through Amsterdam or through London, which are we here in Amsterdam, or Amsterdam North is developing as well. But I haven't heard anything about all the flat rooftops which could be developed into greeneries, basically, especially for tall buildings.
Okay.
I'm quite interested in your opinion about that.
2 questions. One about the numbers of density, and do they include everybody actually there?
No, it's the statistics from the City of Amsterdam, informatie, onderzoek en statistiek, where the number of residents registered there.
Registered, yeah. So we don't know if they're home. But
no, it's okay. I think let's say, the point you're also making that we're working towards this city of 1 million people. We're already there, because there are already 1 million people, let's say, sleeping in the city, if we probably count all the Airbnb and tourists.
Okay, and then the question about the green roofs being potentially something to help us out on the way to Paris.
No, I think for a green structure on rooftops.
The flat rooftops, yes.
So, but I don't think that we then can skip the green structure on street level.
No,
I
it's
think
on
it's
top.
still
It's
very
on
important.
Top, literally.
And I think this is going to be, there's going to be struggle on rooftops. We need space for water there. We need space for electricity there, PV. Maybe let's say the coming 10 years. And then we need what's more? We need then green space again for all this nice green roofs. So this is going to be busy.
It's going to be a battle up your roof.
Dense rooftops.
Right. Density everywhere. Yes, sir. The last question is yours.
Veronderstel dat u lid bent van de gemeenteraad. Gehoord deze beschouwingen, wordt het hoogbouw of niet, als u gaat stemmen?
Should I translate?
It's a goede slotvraag.
That's easy to translate, isn't it?
I'll do my best. If you imagine you're a member of the city council and you make a decision, is it going to be high-rise architecture or not? Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Who wants to be the city council? Starters.
I would say, as city council, come up with nice plans. Having heard this discussion.
It's a bit too easy.
No.
Well,
nice plans. We have tonight. We have heard maybe 6 or 7 criteria for nice plans, and if they are high or low, it doesn't any matter.
The question is too easy.
Up till now, public opinion is in the direction of no high rise whatsoever. That's the basic tone of the last meeting also of ICAM. So
I'm not so sure whether that is correct. I'm not so sure.
That's the real debate.
And tonight, the question was not...
Maybe it's a good question to ask who lives in a high-rise within this room.
Sorry, yeah. The question is not, are we going to solve every problem with high-rise buildings? The question is, do we use at certain locations for certain purposes high-rise buildings? But the basic issue here is density, how to solve density. And a possible solution to that might be, at certain locations, high-rise building, but not as a general idea for solving every problem of the Amsterdam housing.
But there is a proposal in the local government to create high-rise over there.
Over where?
On the Sluiseiland?
On the Sluisbuurt, okay.
On the Sluisbuurt, that's why we're talking about a bit tonight.
Well, we're talking about the whole city, but the Sluisbuurt, that's correct. The plan is there.
Okay, let's forget that. If that proposal is going to be on the agenda in the local council, what would be your approach to that vote?
Your question is, would you say yes or no to the plan to that particular plan?
Yes or no on the cases on the case of high-rise? Yes, right.
Well, no, it's difficult to give a general answer to a question that we're trying to make specific. You cannot be before or against high-rise buildings.
Okay.
You can say. You can say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, okay. In that case, I think we're out of questions and extra questions, and we're certainly out of time, Michel, right? So I invite you all to for drinks, and I would like to thank everybody. First of all, my three